Welcome to an Extra Shot audio blog, part of the Exchange Podcasting Network, brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee. The title of this audio blog is a question. Are current green coffee prices unprecedented or just unusual? And we begin with a caption to a New Yorker cartoon by Shannon Wheeler. Quote, "Just like last time, it's unprecedented."
You say potato and I say potato. You say tomato, I say tomato, potato.
You can accuse me of playing tomato if you want, but in fact, the current price of green coffee as reflected in the C market is only unprecedented in terms of nominal or actual dollars, without adjusting for inflation. Unprecedented means something has actually never happened before. In nominal dollars, the C price for coffee did indeed become unprecedented on December 10th, 2024, when the green coffee market price closed at $3.47. The previous record was set on April 14th, 1977, when the market closed at $3.37. This, quote, record setting might make for a good headline, but the comparison itself is virtually useless in terms of what it means to those of us who buy and sell coffee in the real world, even if the fact of the price couldn't be more meaningful. As challenging or seemingly insurmountable as a market over $3.50 might be, I don't think it's helpful to mislabel a thing as unprecedented when it's really just rare. To me, the word unprecedented overcommunicates a sense of uncertainty, and uncertainty is difficult to manage at every level, from the operational to the emotional. The word unusual holds within it the idea that we've been here before and survived. When we account for inflation while looking at the cost of green coffee, it turns out we have been here before, and as so often been the case over hundreds of years, coffee survived. So let's talk about inflation. In 1977, $3.37 would get you a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, a dozen eggs, a gallon of gas, a postage stamp, and you'll still have enough left over for 2 gumballs from the gumball machine on your way out of the store. Today, that little outing will cost you around $14, not including the gumballs. This also means the C market price for green coffee would need to go well into double digits, $17.40 in fact, for us to be in truly unprecedented territory for the C market era. For the last half of 1977, the C market averaged an actual dollar price of $2.65. For us to share in that experience today, the market would need to average nearly $14 for 6 months. Adjusting for inflation, the average annual C market price has exceeded $3.50 for 17 of the last 52 years. Using this wide-angle lens, it might not even be fair to say that current green coffee prices are unusual. They're just, in the minority. However, only 2 of those 17 years have occurred in recent memory, 1977 and 2011, meaning this is a completely new experience for many, if not most, specialty coffee roasters. We shrug off the fact that a gallon of milk cost around $1.50 in 1977 but costs around $4 today because we understand, even if it's just on some intuitive level, that this is how the world works. The price of eggs might fluctuate dramatically over weeks or months, but prices inevitably and ultimately climb over the years. It's just a fact. Or is it? On July 6, 1979, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On May 12, 1986, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On October 5, 1994, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On April 21, 1997, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On December 16, 2011, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On October 8, 2014, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. On May 12, 2022, coffee closed in New York at $2.15. And on April 11, 2024, coffee closed in New York at, you guessed it, $2.15. These amounts have not been adjusted for inflation. These are actual dollars, so where's the inflation? I'm going to ignore the economist in the back of the room raising their hand and eager to explain that I don't actually understand how the world works, because here's what I do know. While most, if not all, the costs around producing coffee and just living life anywhere have gone up over any number of years you care to examine, the floor price for green Arabica coffee has barely budged and has certainly not come anywhere close to keeping pace with inflation. And before anyone in the back of the room starts telling me about yada 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 commodities, let's have a look at some. Calculating off a 52-year trend line, the futures market price for lumber has gone up approximately 400%. The futures market price for oats has gone up 230%. Wheat has gone up 165%, soybeans 154%, corn 137%, and sugar 60%. Over the same period, August 20th, 1973 to January 29th, 2025, the futures market price for coffee has increased around 15%. But hey, we're beating cotton, where the futures market price has only increased something like 7% over 52 years. The average green coffee market price in the week since the market broke $3 in late November has been around $3.54, using the date of this recording, March 17th. If we push this price back over 30 years, when perhaps 90% of the specialty coffee roasters started doing business, and adjust for inflation against the actual price of green coffee, the most obvious fact is that the price of green coffee has often run contrary to the other costs of doing business. But on a few rare occasions, we've experienced price circumstances similar to those we are experiencing right now. Using average annual green coffee prices over 30 years to reflect prices sustained long enough to have a significant impact on business, we experienced similar conditions to what we're experiencing right now for around 111 trading days in 1997 and 229 trading days in 2011. Push back 52 years and we're no longer talking days, we're talking years. Adjusting for inflation, the coffee industry has lived with average annual prices that were higher, significantly higher in many cases, than what we're experiencing today for a total of 17 years. 17 years. About half of those years we're talking about relative prices that were higher in increments of dollars, not cents. Chances are this is ancient history for most people listening. About 9 out of 10 is my guess. But it's not irrelevant. These are the years when the foundations of the specialty coffee industry were laid, from the day that Erna Knudsen, as a woman, was finally allowed to take a seat at the cupping table in 1973, to the first founders meeting of the Specialty Coffee Association of America in 1983. The average sea market price for coffee adjusted for inflation ranged from $4 to $12. Veterans of those years might remind us that the equivalent of $4, around 65 cents in 1974, was high but not wacky. As I've written elsewhere, for 200 years, adjusting for inflation, a $3 floor price for a pound of green coffee has been more normal than not. From 1976 to 1980, when the relative price ranged from $6 to $12, those were some wacky prices. This is one of the reasons it's so important to talk about inflation when talking about coffee prices. If $3 has long been the psychological green coffee price boogeyman, then $4 is the Freddy Krueger. Except they're not. Relatively speaking, i.e. in every way that matters, these prices have happened. The market has spent a relative 14 years above $4 in the sea market era. Another reason to talk about inflation when talking about coffee prices is that it forces a question. What are the incentives around producing coffee in a market that has been functionally flat for over 50 years? I was working in the coffee roasting sector in 2011 when the price environment for roasters adjusted for inflation was the same as it is today for much of the year. I can tell you that cost-cutting among roasters was painful. I can also tell you that price increases for their customers were late in coming, fear-based, and wholly inadequate. In my experience and in my opinion, one of the most significant failures in business acumen among specialty coffee roasters is the failure to raise prices in concert with the cost of green coffee, or often the price of doing business in general. By artificially keeping prices perpetually behind and not keeping pace with sustained shifts in the market, we don't do coffee drinkers any favors. By distancing them from the fact that they consume an agricultural product subject to the whims and wiles of nature, as well as the effects of geopolitics and social upheaval, we condition coffee drinkers to have price expectations that they don't have for eggs or milk or fruits and vegetables. They expect prices for these items to fluctuate, perhaps wildly at times. They expect the price of their coffee to remain relatively stable. They shouldn't. Contrary to popular belief, which is incorrect but repeated so regularly, people rarely fact-check this. Wishing the curse of interesting times on another person has Western origins and is not actually ancient.
May he live in interesting times. Like it or not, we live in interesting times.
Most times are considered interesting times for better or worse by at least some of the people living through them. Interesting times can mean many things, but the list must include necessarily, I think, unusual times. And as difficult as unusual times might sometimes be, inherent within them, necessarily, I think, is another saying that does not have Western origins, and is actually ancient. This too shall pass. Which is not to say the sea market is going to return to that stretch of time that too many roasters came to understand as normal, between 2014 and 2021, when coffee traded below $2 for over 1,700 trading days in a row. I have no idea if the market's going to go up or down or sideways. I do mean to say, however, that coffee survives. Coffee survives. And if you're really in the mood to hurl a curse at another person, wish for them that they live in genuinely unprecedented times. In the scope of history, very few happenings are truly and objectively unprecedented. When events are absolutely and undeniably unprecedented beyond hyperbole, they are almost always profoundly disruptive in a fundamental and structural sense from which recovery or return is uncertain. On the other hand, we might more often admonish our friends, comrades, and colleagues with the following hope. May these interesting times be merely unusual. You've been listening to the Extra Shot audio blog, Are Current Green Coffee Prices Unprecedented or Just Unusual? Part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee. This Extra Shot audio blog was written, read, and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. Our free use closing music is Coffee Break by Octa Sound, because we could all use a break right now. You'll find a link to the written version of this audio blog in the show notes. You can always email me with questions, comments, and concerns at mike.ferguson@kavoya.com. Thanks for listening.
May you live in interesting times.